For my money, Sadokist, the Canadian Counter-Strike play-by-play commentator, is the best commentator we have right now in all of esports, the best caster. He has great pacing. He really controls his breath well. He manages to keep control of the cast when he's on doing it in that sense. He has a very pleasant sounding voice, so he naturally has kind of an in there. You listen to what he's trying to say. He has good technical ability, which I think has now developed into great technical ability through lots of grinding. He's clearly someone who had a lot of natural talent and could have coasted on that and could have been someone who just had a lot of fun all the time, but has worked hard, has been a real grinder over the last few years, and you can see where he's improved and become quite polished. I think he's someone who's consistently good at exciting moments, big plays, big moments. He doesn't stumble over his words. He gets them out very well. He comes up with fresh new things to say. He manages to... One of the things he's very, very good at compared to all of the casts I've seen in every other esports game is actually thematically fitting what he's saying to what is happening in the game at the time, and therefore creating like metaphors and words that link together and create kind of an atmosphere around the game, more than just the excitement of his voice and more than just the descriptive abilities of a caster. I also think he does a fantastic job, and this is a very underrated area, of creating space for his color commentator and yet still being one of the best play-by-plays in the world, who always seems to get in on the big key moment when it is the excitement, etc. His actual balancing of the cast is really good, and as such, I think that's why Henry G has really risen in his level to become very good as a color commentator. So the funny thing is, traditionally in esports, I'm not really a fan of play-by-play commentators. It's never been something that in general I ever really looked at in the early years, and actually I've typically tended to think that a lot of them were carried by fantastic color commentators. Admittedly in CSGO, that my view started to change on that a bit. But I do think, despite this guy being one of the most pure play-by-plays we've got in esports and in CSGO, I think he's got the complete package. I mean, the criteria by which I judge commentators would be, 1, technical skill. Can you speak? How can you speak? What is the range of your vocabulary? How can you weave together sentences? Can you do something where it's very exciting? Can you do something when it's more of a dull moment? Can you vary between the two? Are you adaptable? There's game knowledge. There's another one. So obviously game knowledge fits more to the color commentator, but there's got to be some degree of game knowledge, or at least you've got to know how to work the game knowledge that you do have, even if you're the color commentator. There's showmanship. Now, in the past, I might have said this would be like likability, because for commentators particularly, it is quite key to be liked by the audience, for them to feel comfortable with you, for them to feel like, you know, like they feel like they're at home when they're listening to you, and you're a soothing voice in that particular sense, not necessarily literally on an aesthetic level, but they get comfortable with it, and then therefore they settle in and they just enjoy the game without overanalyzing or worrying about what you're saying. Now, the reason why I would have said likability in the past is I think in many roles you do need to be liked, but I know from my own career as an analyst, you don't have to necessarily be liked. This is more showmanship. It's more how you translate a feeling or a sense or a persona over to the audience, and then how accepting of that are. Because obviously they can be accepting even if they don't like you, in my role in particular. I would say the final role, number 4, is chemistry with others, because particularly for commentators, this is an area where if you're in a duo, sure, you've got to build up fantastic chemistry with that guy, but also ability to work with multiple others as well really shows kind of the other skills. It'll really display how prevalent they are, because it's not just built up with one guy and you know the ins and outs to yourself. And so there's certain casters who are amazing with one guy or another guy or a type of caster, that put them with others and it'll be a real awkward cast. They'll struggle, there'll be difficulties, or they'll talk over each other, or they won't be talking enough. So in these 4 areas, I mean, technical skill, I think at the moment, Sadokist, he can match up with anyone in the game right now in terms of any esports game at the moment for technical skill. He already had a big head start in this area. I think this was actually the area where he had the best early talent in 2015. But now I think he's worked on it enough that I don't think anyone in esports can go head to head in terms of technical skill and say they're clearly better. You can have your preferences. You can decide for whatever reason that you like someone else or you prefer something about their style. But pure technical skill, I think Sadokist is right up there with the very best that we've ever had in esports. In terms of game knowledge, now this isn't as key an area for him. He obviously, in terms of even play-by-plays in the game, probably lower game knowledge of CSGO. Not really that relevant to play-by-plays as it is in general, and crucially, he has paired with probably the best game knowledge of the guys who are the color commentators in CSGO. So that's really matched up on his weakness in that particular sense, much as, by the way, I'll get into this later, he kind of covers for some of Henry G's weaknesses. And so it's not really an issue that you ever notice, never really a problem in this particular sense. And he's done a very intelligent job of making himself more of a pure play-by-play in that sense and not really commenting on it that much. Therefore, it's not a weakness for him. Though in terms of showmanship, I think he's actually become one of the best that we have right now. For me, the best in terms of showmanship in CSGO for a long time was Semler. He was the one who really had that outgoing, that gregarious kind of personality that drew you in and made things more exciting, and he could be a bit bawdy, and at the same time he could hype things up. He's the one who's translated raw personality the best. I know people liked Anders the most. He was the most amiable and had a very good skill, a very, very good wide skill set. But I feel like Semler was always the king of the showmanship aspect. I feel like Sadokist is right there now. I mean, obviously the Snacks versus Na'Vi moment in the final of ESL when New York stands out as a moment, but this guy's done that so many times. His consistency at being able to get fantastic moments off like that and get across jokes and to switch up between being serious and being epic and having an amazing moment and then making it more lighthearted and then throwing it into banter. I think he's up there with the best in that particular sense in all of esports. And so this is somewhere, an aspect where he had some elements of that early on, but he's really had to work at it and he's really developed it a lot more. He's gotten kind of the balance down for when you can do that and how you can do that. And I think probably his most underrated quality actually is chemistry with others, because I think actually, and I'll get into this later, he's someone where it's just because he's now done so many casts with Henry and it's become this established duo that people to the same degree haven't gotten to see how versatile he could be with other casters in a way that we have seen from people like Anders, where they were in more of the wild, wild west, where you were working with different people. It wasn't always the same casting duo, or the politics behind the scenes meant you weren't all hired for the same events back then. So to contrast Sadokist against the other CSGO casters, we obviously have some incredibly talented casters in CSGO. I mean, Monte Cristo made a video about this recently. I'll link that up there. I agree. I think CSGO has the best casting talent overall. I had a video myself about celebrating the CSGO casting talent. I'll link that up there. Now, in terms of the guys who are doing the play-by-play, funnily enough, our premier duo for the whole game's history, obviously Anders and Semler, actually both do play-by-play. They're both hybrids. I mean, I've always thought it was more like Anders is like the 25% color and 75% play-by-play, and Semler was like the 75% color, the 25% play-by-play. I know they've really mixed it up over the years depending on the game and how it's going, but I've always thought of them better suited to that kind of aspect. Now, compared to Semler, I think that he's just done so many events over the last few years, and in some senses, he's come in, I think, with more natural talent than Semler has. And so I think in some senses, he's overtaken him in that particular respect. Semler will always be a favourite of mine. And he always really keys in terms of the frequency, in terms of what I like from casting. And I think he does a really good job of weaving in some of the analysis as well. I think he does a great job of like adding in the colour aspect, but making it more invisible as to when the colour's coming in, to when the play-by-play is coming in. And the way they hand off is so unique in that duo. Now, Anders is someone who has a deceptive amount of game knowledge because he puts in a lot of work on the theory craft type things and talking to people, but obviously he's got to be one of the kings of the play-by-play overall. Now, he is very good, but I feel like where Anders struggles a little bit compared to Sadokist is that Anders is probably the first to identify the formula of how you do the hype moments and how you do the really exciting ones and how you actually give yourself a chance for a moment to become an exciting one in a way that otherwise you might not get. And if you hadn't built it up, you can't just suddenly go to fifth gear out of nowhere from the first gear, as it were, if it then becomes incredible. He's the one who first worked that formula out. And I think in that sense, he's really defined his casting and he's very, very good. The thing with Anders is his average casts as good as anyone in the history of esports. He can really bring it average cast. He can do all types of opponent. He works very well with people. So he's a very, very well-rounded person, a very consistent person. But the thing for me with Sadokist is I feel like Sadokist has taken that kind of formula and polished it further. And I feel like he's gotten his hype casting, his excitement, in the way he translates it, to the highest level of anyone I've seen in CSGO overall. I mean, someone had the showmanship aspect that could carry that over. But I feel like Sadokist on a technical level has gotten that to the higher level. Now, Bardolph, I actually feel like they're a bit unfair to compare him because I have to say, I think a lot of their duo is DDK, I have to say, and Bardolph just works around that. Now, DDK himself, if the game doesn't provide it, isn't going to naturally burst into crazy excitement in the same way. He's gotten better over the years. But I feel like Bardolph brings that element. He brings the energy to their cast overall in that sense, and he kind of directs it. And that's a key element of what he's doing there. But I feel like it's a bit more one-dimensional in their cast. I can see why it has its own niche value and why it's very well loved. And I enjoy it myself in its own ways. But I think it's more difficult, like, we're talking about comparing, like, the best player to someone who's very good at their role. So you can't compare Zipnix to, like, Nico when he's on fire or Cold Zero. You know, there's a reason why there's a separation between those players. Now, in terms of contrasting against other esports, I actually think that in League of Legends, I mean, forget play-by-play in this game. There is no play-by-play caster in League of Legends who can fuck with Sadokist. I mean, they're just not on his level. Some of them are very good in terms of technical ability, but then very lacking in other areas. Some of them are good at, like, working with a bunch of different casters, but then don't hit the same ceiling. I don't think any play-by-play overall can tick all the boxes in the same way Sadokist can. I think in terms of color commentators, there's a good bunch of color commentators in that game. Some of them, like, either aren't as critical. That's one of the flaws I've always had is someone like Jat, or they're good, but then they're very kind of standard default in the game knowledge, which I think are some of them. I think probably the best caster overall in League of Legends, I've always thought was Monte Cristo, actually. And I think overall it's because he combined, like, the showmanship aspect, good technical ability, obviously he'll maintain his game knowledge, chemistry with others was pretty good. So I think he kept all the criteria fairly high up and worked on them a lot as well, and therefore was able to craft, like, a very distinct persona that was well defined. He understood what he wanted to translate, and he had the technical ability to pull it off in that sense. But I think overall, I mean, he's obviously had to move to Overwatch. He's not really in the contention in the same way right now because Overwatch as a game isn't as big. He's not in League of Legends as it is, so really he's gone from that game. So at the moment, I mean, Sadokist is in his prime. He's in his best game. Everything's going for him. He's getting the finals. His skills are at their absolute peak. I feel like this is the ideal moment where Sadokist even supersedes names like that. In StarCraft 2, this is a bit more tricky because I do feel like you can put Artosis against any caster in any game at any point in time, and he can always compete. He'll always be right up there in the conversation. But obviously, there's the fact that they've done so many years in that particular game. And so I wonder in that particular sense if the same kind of, if Artosis actually has branched out more. Like, I always felt like to some degree, having Tasteless and having Tasteless do so much of kind of the hype element of it and the excitement element, I think Artosis probably should have worked a little bit more on some of the other elements of the showmanship. Like, he does a very good nerd persona, that kind of like the niche that he goes into. And I love it. Like, it keys into what I like, but I feel like he maybe, this would have been interesting if he'd worked with more casters on a more regular basis. I think he's someone where I'd really like to see him expand some of the other skill sets and see where else his casting goes when it's not just with Tasteless. Now, with Tasteless, I'm not going to sugarcoat this at all. I think in StarCraft 2 is very overhyped. I think a lot of new people were coming onto the bandwagon and they heard about him and thought he was very good. I've always thought he was good, but I never thought he hit the heights that he had in Brood War. So actually, his return to Brood War has been really revitalizing for him from my perspective, and really enjoyable to watch because I felt like it actually has returned a lot of his raw passion for the game, and he's been able to be up to date on the meta and take over again. So in this sense, I think all these guys are great, but they're old enough where they've got like the equivalent of nagging injuries, or they've got some areas where they don't have the same stamina, or they can't grind to the same degree. So in this sense, these guys are legends and they'll always retain a top status and they can go back to the top, but at the moment they're not in their prime like Sadokist is. Now, in terms of Dota 2, I've always said this in Dota 2, there's not actually that much play-by-play talent, in my opinion. Like, I know Toby 1 definitely was amiable enough, and in the early days when game knowledge wasn't as much a premium, he absolutely was the perfect everyman that could translate it over to the average viewer in a way that really, really captured their imagination, and in that sense will always be a legend. But for me, like, the best guys in terms of the more pure play-by-play nowadays, it's got to be Capitalist and LD. Like, Capitalist, I think, has a really good skill set. I think he can be the Sadokist of Dota 2 if he keeps grinding. I think he's about a year away from potentially being just the clear-cut number one in all senses. Like, I think he could do it. I think LD will always have that niche appeal. I think he's got an amazing voice for hype moments, and he has very good game knowledge in terms of not just in the game, but actually knowing the scene. That's the key thing to me, and he's a guy who knows his limits. So I think LD also is a very good one, but there's certain areas where, I mean, he doesn't always work with all the other casters quite as well, I don't think. I think in that game, they struggle from not having as strict duos because, unfortunately, some of the great colours in that game go on and become a coach or a player again, or go on the analysis desk. So it's not as simple to build up the same level of chemistry and therefore show off your your best skills and have some of your weaknesses in Dota 2. I mean, for example, one of my favorites always from the, because I said I had the bias towards color guys, was always Cinderin, but obviously, you know, he goes off and becomes a player or a coach or whatever else, and so he's not available to therefore be at his peak and to be doing all the events and to see, you know, kind of blow it out and see what the top gear for that guy is if he's doing this game. So the interesting thing about Sadokist is, in terms of talent, he could have been one of the elite casters quite early in his career, but he's been grinding for 2 years now. I mean, he showed that great promise really early. MLGX Games Aspen, January 2015. You could already see this talent there, but then he had to develop his European knowledge of the game. And then he had to develop what really is his persona. And then also he had to work on his skill set. And then he had to develop a partnership with Henry G, this duo, and then figure out the roles that he was going to do in that particular sense. So I actually think he was already primed for top tier success already by the time autumn of 2015 when he finally got his first shot at a major. But it took him a whole year more to really get true contendership for the elite status. I mean, he had to overcome established names and figures. He had to make his duo the best. He had to battle through all the issues of how is he going to get top big games when the bigger duo's there? How is he going to get finals? What's he going to do with all the industry politics when you are an ambitious guy and you are a talented guy and you want to push for more, but the industry, especially the kind of friendly bunch we had in CSGO, was more about like, no, just wait your turn. Like, you know, oh, we don't battle internally. We let others decide these things. Well, if you're ambitious, it's going to go head to head with that. And so that's kind of the tightrope he's had to walk to maintain friendships, but also figure out how to get his career to where he wants it to be. Because it's all well and good being friends with guys who are your rivals, but they are your rivals. When you get on the ice, when the lights go on, you have to be willing to wreck that guy in terms of trying to be the best at what you're doing overall. Not obviously from like a Lord Baelish style fucking him over behind the scenes, which I don't agree with. So I actually think when you look at it, it's not the guy who just made it off talent. He never had anything handed to him. This is someone where he had a couple of opportunities. There were smaller ones. He made absolutely the most of them at every opportunity. Then as he gradually got slightly better opportunities, he continued to nail it, continued to knock it out the park. And he was a grinder for 2 straight years at the top level, attending every event he could, every big tournament, trying to make the most of every match. And now he has taken the top spot, in my opinion. It was never gifted to him at any point in time. No one ever stood aside and said, you go first. No, this is a guy who took it. Nothing was given to him in his climb. I think if you look at his duo with Henry G, you really see some of his skill set kind of shine through in that sense, because they have an advantage in as much as they have the most well-defined duo overall, because they have the pure straight CS roles, which is you have Sadokist is the play-by-play, you have Henry G as the color commentator, and they're both doing a really good job at it. But the key thing is, I remember listening to Henry in the early days. I remember first listening to him at Gfinity G3, the one where Virtus Pro won it over Titan. It was in around, I think it was August of 2014. And he clearly had He clearly had ability. He clearly could be a color commentator, but you would never listen to him and then go, this guy will be the best color commentator, because he was very, very dry and there wasn't a whole lot in terms of persona. Like, he hadn't worked on showmanship at all. He didn't have the right sort of people to bounce off in that particular sense. He's a guy where if you just threw him in the mix, like Moses does sometimes at events, and just had him cast with different people, I don't think it'd work very well, actually. I think he would have just been good and he'd been very serviceable. He could have been like hovering around the top, but I don't think he would have become the best. For me, Sadokist brought the energy, brought the right kind of counterpoint to him, the countervailing balance, which they play off each other so well. And that's the key thing to me, because I actually think that with Henry is so dry, even in terms of his humor, as in it's very understated, it's very nuanced, that you actually need Sadokist to be more of the energy bouncing off it in that sense. Because then Henry's like that great straight man to the joke that he makes, or Henry's jokes, Sadokist reacts to in a way where he gets it. Like, I think they pair up very well, and that's why in terms of marketability, I think they've really shot through the roof in the last year or so. Because obviously, in terms of talent, yeah, their talent is there to varying degrees in different parts, and they've worked on that. But that alone will get you to be the number one duo. I also think that his work with Henry also belies the fact, as I referenced earlier, that he actually can work very well with others. I mean, when he did do some stuff with Moses, it was pretty good. I've seen him do casting with other people, and I actually feel like if he'd have had more of a shot at it, like in the early days when Anders used to just pair up with all these people and give new people a chance, I think that, like Anders, he's the perfect guy to throw a potential new color caster in with and really see how they can hang at the top level, because those guys will adapt around them, will give them space, will even give them direction and give them pointers as to what they want to do there, and then they'll bring the element that guy can't bring. And that's something that I think he could really have done that. And so as a result, I think actually you can't just say it's because he worked with Henry G that he got to this position, because I also think it would have been very interesting if his originally planned duo with Moses had gone through. Because actually, sure, I think in terms of humor and personality fit, I think it's a better fit with Henry G, actually, because like I said, Henry G's a very dry, is more of the straight man in that sense. I think they really work well in that particular sense. But I think they would have been a very likable duo with Moses and Sadokist. I think both pretty good in terms of pacing, both pretty good at playing off each other and coming up with stuff. I think they would have in their own way had their own charm, and they could certainly have gotten to the top or close to the top. I also think you have to give him credit in as much as when I've seen Sadokist do desks, this guy could quit tomorrow doing casting and be one of the best desk hosts in the world, in all of esports. He really was very, I remember working with him at Starlord at one of his first events, and he was very critical. Like on the first days he had issues, sometimes he tried to give his opinion too much, or he didn't get people involved. It was only like a day or two afterwards, he was picking things up, he was going to the next points, he was getting all these components in line. It was very impressive stuff, because I worked with a lot of desk hosts, so I can see how gradual it usually is, or you have to give them direction as to how you want them to change it up, or they're struggling to figure out how to use a new guy. I think he did a fantastic job, and it shows me that he could excel as a desk host, and as a result, be in other games doing that if he wants to, if he doesn't want to be a commentator anymore. As a small aside as well, I mean, we've told this story on By the Numbers, but I've also seen Sadokist work in scenarios where he's super tired, where he had an injury, or he'd been... his extracurricular activities were taking their toll. And you can tell when that's happened, if you've done a lot of events like I have, because the casters, you can see when they're struggling, when they're not quite getting through it. In those scenarios, almost every time I've watched the game, he's come out and he's given such a high level, no one outside of the industry could have known that he was in that situation. So his game in terms of how he plays when he's hurt, and is actually fantastic. Just shows the level of ability and ability to focus and to bring out your best and just be in the moment of what you're doing as a caster that he has. So going forwards, I feel like actually, to use the old cliched term, the world is his oyster. I mean, this guy could partner with other people in the future or in other games. He could definitely be one of the best play-by-plays in another game. I think his technical skill set is there, and his willingness to not overstep his bounds in terms of the color stuff. I think he could be a desk host in other games. So I think this, as long as he wants to be a caster, his future is really bright. And for me right now, he's at the top of the mountain. He's the best, and on all respects, he's done it in terms of technical skill, working with others. He's built up his duo. He's got his duo to the point where it's very good. He's worked on marketability. He's got the balance between the duo right, so he's not starving that guy of his attention or taking away from that guy's shine to make himself better. He's able to match up with people who are veterans from other games and some of the best of all time. And certainly he can do other games and remain at the top and transition over into other esports titles.